The First, Second, and Third Samnite Wars were fought between the Roman Republic, the Samnites, who lived on a stretch of the Apennine Mountains to the south of Rome and the north of the Lucanians. The first of these wars was the result of Rome intervening to rescue the Campanian city of Capua from a Samnite attack. The second one was the result of Rome's intervention in the politics of the city of Naples and developed into a contest over the control of much of central and southern Italy. The third war also involved a struggle over the control of this part of Italy. The wars extended over half a century, and the peoples to the east, north and west of Samnium, as well as the peoples of central Italy north of Rome and the Senan Gauls, got involved to various degrees and at various points in time. The Samnites were one of early Rome's most formidable rivals. Background: by the time of the first of these wars, the southward expansion of Rome's territory had reached the river Liris, which was the boundary between Latium and Campania. This river is now called Garigliano, and it is the boundary between the modern regions of Lazio and Campania. In those days the name Campania referred to the plain between the coast and the Apennine Mountains, which stretched from the river Liris down to the bays of Naples and Salerno. The northern part of this area was inhabited by the Sidicini, the Auronsi and the Orsoni. The central and southern part was inhabited by the Campanians, who were people who had migrated from Samnium and were closely related to the Samnites, but had developed their distinctive identity. The Samnites were a confederation of 4 tribes who lived on the mountains to the east of Campania and were the most powerful people in the area. The Samnites, Campanians and Sidicini spoke Oscan languages. Their languages were part of the Osco-Umbrian linguistic family, which also included Umbrian and the Sabellian languages to the north of Samnium. The Lucanians who lived to the south were also Oscan speakers. Diodorus Siculus and Livy report that in 354 BC Rome and the Samnites concluded a treaty, but neither lists the terms agreed upon. Modern historians have proposed that the treaty established the river Liris as the boundary between their spheres of influence, with Rome's lying to its north and the Samnites to its south. This arrangement broke down when the Romans intervened south of the Liris to rescue the Campanian city of Capua from an attack by the Samnites. First Samnite War. Livy is the only preserved source to give a continuous account of the war, which has become known in modern historiography as the First Samnite War. In addition, the Fasta Triumphales records 2 Roman triumphs stating to this war, and some of the events described by Livy are also mentioned by other ancient writers. Outbreak. Livy's account. According to Livy, the First Samnite War started not because of any enmity between Rome and the Samnites, but due to outside events. The spark came when the Samnites, without provocation, attacked the Sidicini, a tribe living north of Campania with their chief settlement at Tinum Sidicinum. Unable to stand against the Samnites, the Sidicini sought help from the Campanians. However, Livy continues, the Samnites defeated the Campanians in a battle in Sidicin territory and then turned their attention toward the Campanians. First they seized the Tifata hills overlooking Capua and, having left a strong force to hold them, marched into the plain between the hills and Capua. There they defeated the Campanians in a second battle and drove them within their walls. This compelled the Campanians to ask Rome for help. At Rome, the Campanian ambassadors were admitted to an audience with the Senate. In a speech, they proposed an alliance between Rome and the Campanians, noting how the Campanians with their famous wealth could be of aid to the Romans, and that they could help to subdue the Volsci, who were enemies of Rome. They pointed out that nothing in Rome's treaty with the Samnites prevented them from also making a treaty with the Campanians, and warning that if they did not, the Samnites would conquer Campania and its strength would be added to the Samnites instead of to the Romans. After discussing this proposal, the Senate concluded that while there was much to be gained from a treaty with the Campanians, and that this fertile area could become Rome's granary, Rome could not ally with them and still be considered loyal to their existing treaty with the Samnites, and for this reason they had to refuse the proposal. After being informed of Rome's refusal, the Campanian embassy, in accordance with their instructions, surrendered the people of Campania and the city of Capua unconditionally into the power of Rome. Moved by this surrender, the senators resolved that Rome's honor now required that the Campanians and Capua, who by their surrender had become the possession of Rome, be protected from Samnite attacks. Envoys were sent to the Samnites with the introductions to request that they, in view of their mutual friendship with Rome, spare territory which had become the possession of Rome, and, if this was not heeded, to warn them to keep their hands off the city of Capua and the territory of Campania. The envoys delivered their message as instructed to the Samnites' National Assembly. They were met with a defiant response. Not only did the Samnites declare their intention of waging war against Capua, but their magistrates left the council chamber, and in tones loud enough for the envoys to hear, ordered their armies to march out at once into Campanian territory and ravage it. When this news reached Rome, the officials were sent to demand redress, and when this was refused, Rome declared war against the Samnites. Modern views. The historical accuracy of Livy's account is disputed among modern historians. They are willing to accept that while Livy might have simplified the way in which the Sidicini, Campani and Samnites came to be at war, his narrative is here, at least in outline, historical. The Sidicini's stronghold at Tinum controlled an important regional crossroads, which would have provided the Samnites with a motive for conquest. The First Samnite War might have started quite by accident, as Livy claimed. The Sidicini were located on the Samnite River side of the Liris, and while the Roman Samnite treaty might only have dealt with the middle Liris, not the lower, Rome does not appear to have been overly concerned for the fate of the Sidicini. The Samnites could therefore go to war with Sidicini without fear of Roman involvement. It was only the unforeseen involvement of the Campani that brought in the Romans. Many historians have, however, had difficulty accepting the historicity of the Campanian embassy to Rome, in particular whether Livy was correct in describing the Campani as surrendering themselves unconditionally into Roman possession. That Capua and Rome were allied in 343 is less controversial, as such a relationship underpins the whole First Samnite War. Historians have noted the similarities between the events leading to the First Samnite War and events which, according to Thucydides, caused the Peloponnesian War. But there are differences as well. It is clear that Livy, or his sources, has consciously modeled the Campanian embassy after the Corcyraean debate. In Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War there are many parallels between the speech given by the Campanian ambassador to the Roman Senate in Livy and the speech of the Corcyraean ambassador to the Athenian assembly in Thucydides. But while Thucydides' Athenians debate the Corcyraeans' proposal in pragmatic terms, Livy's senators decide to reject the Campanian alliance based on moral arguments. Livy might well have intended his literary educated readers to pick up this contrast. The exaggerated misery of the surrendering Campani contrast with the Campanian arrogance, a stock motif in ancient Roman literature. It is also unlikely that Livy's description of the Samnite assembly is based on any authentic sources. However, it does not necessarily follow that because the speeches are invented, a standard feature in ancient historians, the Campanian surrender must be invented as well. The chief difficulty lies in how rich Capua in 343 can have been reduced to such dire straits by the Samnites that the Campani were willing to surrender everything to Rome. During the Second Punic War, Capua famously sided with Carthage, but after a lengthy siege she had to surrender unconditionally in 211 BC, after which the Capuans were harshly punished by Rome. Salmon therefore held that the Campanian surrender in 343 is a retrojection by later Roman historians. This invention would serve the double purpose of exonerating Rome from treaty breaking in 343 and justifying the punishment handed out in 211. What Rome agreed to in 343 was an alliance on terms similar to the treaty she had with the Latins and the Hernici. Cornell accepts the surrender as historical. Studies have shown that voluntary submission by one party was a common feature in the diplomacy of this period. Likewise, Oakley does not believe the surrender of 343 to be a retrojection, not finding many similarities between the events of 343 and 211. The ancient historians recalled many later instances, whose historicity are not doubted, where a state appealed to Rome for assistance in war against a stronger enemy. The historical evidence shows the Romans considered such supplicants to have technically the same status as surrendered enemies, but in practice Rome would not want to abuse would-be allies. Forsyth, like Salmon, argues that the surrender in 343 is a retrojection of that of 211, invented to better justify Roman actions and for good measure shift the guilt for the First Samnite War onto the manipulative company. Livy portrays the Romans as selflessly assuming the burden of defending the company, but this is a common theme in Roman Republican histories, whose authors wish to show that Rome's wars had been just. Military success was the chief road to prestige and glory among the highly competitive Roman aristocracy. Evidence from later, more well-documented time periods shows a Roman Senate quite capable of manipulating diplomatic circumstances so as to provide just cause for an expansionary war. There is no reason to believe this was not also the case in the second half of the 4th century. There are also recorded examples of Rome rejecting appeals for help, implying that the Romans in 343 had the choice of rejecting the company. 3 Roman victories according to Livy. The 2 Roman consuls for 343, Marcus Valerius Corvus and Aulus Cornelius Cossus, both marched with armies against the Samnites. Valerius led his army into Campania and Cornelius his into Samnium, where he camped at Saticula. Livy then goes on to narrate how Rome won 3 different battles against the Samnites. Valerius won the first battle, fought at Mount Gaurus near Cumae. Only after a last desperate charge by Romans in fading daylight finally routed the Samnites after a day of hard fighting. The second battle almost ended in disaster for the Romans when the Samnites attempted to trap the other consul, Cornelius Cossus, and his army in a mountain pass. However, one of Cornelius' military tribunes, Publius Decius Mus, led a small detachment to seize a hilltop, distracting the Samnites and allowing the Roman army to escape the trap. Decius and his men slipped away to safety during the night, and the morning after the unprepared Samnites were attacked and defeated by the Romans. Still determined to seize victory, the Samnites collected their forces and laid siege to Suessula at the eastern edge of Campania. Leaving his baggage behind, Marcus Valerius took his army by forced marches to Suessula. Low on supplies, and underestimating the size of the Roman army, the Samnites scattered their army to forage for food. This gave Valerius the opportunity to win a third Roman victory when he first captured the Samnites' lightly defended camp and then scattered their foragers. These Roman successes against the Samnites convinced Valerii to convert her 40 years' truce with Rome into a permanent peace treaty, and the Latins to abandon the planned war against Rome and instead campaign against the Paeline. The friendly city-state of Carthage sent a congratulatory embassy to Rome with a £25 crown for the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Both consuls then celebrated triumphs over the Samnites. The Fasta Triumphales records that Valerius and Cornelius celebrated their triumphs over the Samnites on the 21st of September and the 22nd of September respectively. Modern historians have doubted the historical accuracy of Livy's description of these 3 battles. Livy's battle scenes for this time period are mostly free reconstructions by him and his sources. and there are no reasons why these should be different. The number of Samnites killed and the amounts of spoils taken by the Romans have clearly been exaggerated. Historians have noted the many similarities between the story of Publius Decius Mus and an event said to have taken place on Sicily in 258 when the Romans were fighting the First Punic War against Carthage. According to the ancient sources, a Roman army was in danger of being trapped in a defile when a military tribune led a detachment of 300 men to seize a hilltop in the middle of the enemy. The Roman army escaped, but of the 300 only the tribune survived. It is unlikely that this latter, in ancient times more famous, episode has not influenced the descriptions of the former. Salmon also found several other similarities between the campaigns of 343 and later events which he considered to be doublets. Both the first and the second Samnite War starts with an invasion of Samnium by a Cornelius. The way in which a Roman army was led into a trap resembles the famous disaster at the Caudine Forks in 321, and there are similarities to the campaigns of Publius Cornelius Arvina in 306 and Publius Decius Mus in 297. He also thought Valerius Corvus' two Campanian victories could be doublets of Roman operations against Hannibal in the same area in 215. On the other hand, the entries in the Fasta Triumphales support some measure of Roman success. In Salmon's reconstruction, therefore, there was only one battle in 343, perhaps fought on the outskirts of Capua near the shrine of Juno Gaura, and ending with a narrow Roman victory. Oakley dismisses these claims of doublets and inclines towards believing there were 3 battles. The Samnites would have gained significant ground in Campania by the time the Romans arrived, and Valerius' 2 victories could be the outcome of twin Samnite attacks on Capua and Cumae. And while Samnite ambushes is somewhat of a stock motif in Livy's narrative of the Samnite Wars, this might simply reflect the mountainous terrain in which these wars were fought. The story of Decius as preserved has been patterned after that of the military tribune of 258. But Decius could still have performed some heroic act in 343, the memory of which became the origin of the later embellished tale. Forsyth considers the episode with Cornelius Cossus and Decius Mus to have been invented, in part to foreshadow Decius' sacrifice in 340. Decius might have performed some heroic act which then enabled him to become the first of his family to reach the consulship in 340. But if so, no detail of the historical event survives. Instead, later annists have combined the disaster at the Caudine Forks with the tale of the military tribune of 258 to produce the entirely fictitious story recorded by Livy. The difference being that while in the originals the Romans suffered defeat and death, here none of Decius' men are killed and the Romans win a great victory. End of the war. No fighting is reported for 342. Instead, the sources focuses on a mutiny by part of the soldiery. According to the most common variant, following the Roman victories of 343, the Campani asked Rome for winter garrisons to protect them against the Samnites. Subverted by the luxurious lifestyle of the Campani, the garrison soldiers started plotting to seize control and set themselves up as masters of Campania. However, the conspiracy was discovered by the consuls of 342 before the coup could be carried out. Afraid of being punished, the plotters mutinied, formed a rebel army and marched against Rome. Marcus Valerius Corvus was nominated dictator to deal with the crisis. He managed to convince the mutineers to lay down their arms without bloodshed, and a series of economic, military and political reforms were passed to deal with their grievances. The history of this mutiny is, however, disputed among modern historians, and it is possible that the whole narrative has been invented to provide a background for the important reforms passed this year. These reforms included the Leges Genutiae, which stated that no one could be re-elected to the same office within less than 10 years, and it is clear from the list of consuls that except in years of great crisis this law was enforced. It also became a firm rule that one of the consuls had to be a plebeian. Livy writes that in 341 one of the Roman consuls, Lucius Aemilius Mamercus, entered Samnite territory but found no army to oppose him. He was ravaging their territory when Samnite envoys came to ask for peace. When presenting their case to the Roman Senate, the Samnite envoys stressed their former treaty with the Romans, which unlike the company they had formed in times of peace, and that the Samnites now intended to go to war against the Sidicini, who were no friends of Rome. The Roman praetor, T. Aemilius, delivered the reply of the Senate. Rome was willing to renew her former treaty with the Samnites. Moreover, Rome would not involve herself in the Samnites' decision to make war or peace with the Sidicini. Once peace had been concluded, the Roman army withdrew from Samnium. The impact of Aemilius' invasion of Samnium may have been exaggerated. It could even have been entirely invented by a later writer to bring the war to an end, with Rome suitably triumphant. The sparse mentions of praetors in the sources for the 4th century are generally thought to be historical. It is possible, therefore, that as praetor, T. Aemilius really was involved in the peace negotiations with the Samnites. The First Samnite War ended in a negotiated peace rather than one part dominating the other. The Romans had to accept that the Sidicini belonged to the Samnite sphere, but their alliance with the Campani was a far greater prize. Campania's wealth and manpower was a major addition to Rome's strength. Historicity of the war. The many problems with Livy's account and Diodorus' a failure to mention it has even caused some historians to reject the entire war as unhistorical. More recent historians have, however, accepted the basic historicity of the war. No Roman historian would have invented a series of events so unflattering to Rome. Livy was clearly embarrassed of the way Rome had turned from being an ally to an enemy of the Samnites. It is also unlikely that the Romans could have established such a dominating position in Campania as they had after 341 without Samnite resistance. Finally, Diodorus ignores many other events in early Roman history, such as the early years of the Second Samnite War. His omission of the First Samnite War can therefore not be taken as proof of its unhistoricity.